Every July 1st, a retired baseball player receives a payment for exactly $1,193,248.20. He has not played for the team in decades. He doesn't need to hit a home run. He does not need to show up to the stadium. He does not even need to work for them. The money simply arrives. And it will keep arriving every July until 2035. By the time the final payment is made, a bill that originally stood at around $5.9 million will have produced almost $30 million in scheduled payments. And all of it came from one unusual contract decision. This is the story of Bobby Bonilla and one of the strangest payment agreements in professional sports. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the 1990s. Bonilla was already a successful Major League Baseball player. He had been an all-star multiple times. He had earned large contracts, and by the end of the decade he was playing for the New York Mets. But things were not going particularly well. His performance had declined. His relationship with the team had become difficult. And after the 1999 season, the Mets wanted him gone. There was one problem. His contract did not disappear just because the team no longer wanted him. The Mets still owed Bonilla roughly $5.9 million. Normally this would be fairly simple. The team releases the player receives the money guaranteed under the contract, and everyone moves on. But Bonilla and his representatives proposed something different. Instead of giving him the $5.9 million immediately, the Mets could keep the money for more than a decade. Bonilla would receive nothing from this particular agreement in 2000. Nothing in 2001, nothing in 2002, and nothing for years after that. In exchange, the Mets agreed that the unpaid money would grow. At 8% annual interest, that little number changes the entire story, because $5.9 million today and $5.9 million decades from now are not the same thing. If someone owes you money but asks to keep it for years, there is a cost to waiting. Bonilla's agreement compensated him for that wait. And the longer the money remained unpaid, the larger the obligation became. The payment schedule would not even begin until 2011, more than a decade after the original deal. Then once the payment started, the Mets would send Bonilla $1,193,248.20 every July 1st, and they would do it again the following year. And again, for 25 years, from 2011 through 2035. Do the multiplication, and the result is incredible. $1,193,248.20 multiplied by 25 equals $29,831,205, almost $30 million in scheduled payments, from an original obligation of roughly $5.9 million. Now, this does not mean Bonilla magically turned $5.9 million into $30 million overnight. That is important. He had to wait. A lot. The payments were spread across decades. Money paid far into the future is worth less than the same amount paid immediately. And the 8% rate was compensating him for allowing the Mets to delay payment. But that is exactly what makes the agreement so interesting. Bonilla traded immediate access to a large amount of money for a much larger stream of future payments. The Mets took the opposite side. They kept the money in the short term and accepted a much larger future obligation. At the time, there was logic behind that decision. If the team could keep the $5.9 million and earn investment returns greater than the interest being promised to Bonilla, the arrangement could work in their favour. Imagine you can borrow money at 8%, but you believe you can reliably earn 12, 15, or even more % elsewhere. In that situation, delaying the payment can look attractive. The problem is that expected investment returns are not guaranteed. Contractual payments are, and that difference would become especially important in this story. The Mets' ownership had money connected to investments managed by Bernie Madoff. For years, those investments appeared to produce remarkably consistent returns. Those returns helped make the idea of delaying Bonilla's payment look much less frightening. Why hand over nearly $6 million immediately? If the money could stay invested, the Mets could potentially earn more from the capital while Bonilla waited. At least, that was the idea. Then the Madoff investment operation collapsed. It was revealed to be one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history. The extraordinary investment returns were not what they appeared to be. But Bonilla's contract did not collapse with them. His agreement was still his agreement. The investment strategy behind the decision could fail. The payment obligation remained. And then 2011 arrived. July 1st. The first payment came due, $1,193,248.20. $248.20. The following July, same amount. The year after that, same amount. Eventually, baseball fans began treating July 1st almost like a holiday. Bobby Bonilla Day. Every year, the same story returns. A player who stopped playing Major League Baseball years ago gets another seven-figure payment from the New York Mets. And every year, people ask the same question. How could a professional sports team agree to something like this? But calling the contract stupid misses part of the story. Deferred compensation itself is not unusual. Professional athletes, executives, business owners, and employees sometimes agree to receive money later instead of immediately. There can be financial advantages for both sides. For the person receiving the money, deferred payments can create predictable long-term income. For the organization making the payments, delaying cash leaving the business can provide flexibility today. The strange part is not simply that Bonilla was paid later. It is the combination of the amount, the 8% interest, the long delay, and the 25-year payment schedule. That is what turned the agreement into something people still talk about decades later. Think about Bonilla's side for a moment. In 2000, he could have received roughly $5.9 million. That is obviously an enormous amount of money. Instead, he agreed to wait 11 years before receiving the first payment from this deal. For more than a decade, there was no annual $1 million check from this agreement. Then at age 48, long after the period when most professional baseball players are earning their largest playing salaries, the payments began. $1.19 million. Then another. Then another. The money effectively created a second financial life after baseball. Most athletes face the opposite problem. Their earning power can peak while they are young. Then their playing career ends. The large salary disappears, and they have to make the money earned during their career last for the rest of their life. Bonilla's arrangement pushed a portion of his baseball earnings far into the future. He was creating income for his older self while he was still an active professional athlete. That does not automatically make deferred payment better than taking the cash. If Bonilla had taken the money immediately and invested it extremely well, he might have produced an even larger result. If inflation remained high for decades, the future payments would also lose purchasing power. And there is always value in having money available today rather than waiting for tomorrow. But Bonilla did not need to correctly predict the stock market every year. His future payments were written into an agreement. The amount was predetermined, the dates were predetermined, and the obligation belonged to the team. That is the power of the contract. The famous headline is that the Mets are still paying a retired player. But the more interesting story is why. Bonilla did not accidentally discover money sitting in an old contract. He and his representatives negotiated how money already owed to him would be paid. And one decision changed the timeline from a single payment around the year 2000 into 25 payments stretching all the way to 2035. There is another reason this story became so famous. It creates an incredible visual contradiction. Imagine walking into a baseball stadium in 2035. Some of the active players may have been born years after Bonilla played his final major league game. The sport will have changed. The contracts will have changed. The stadium experience will have changed. Entire generations of players will have entered and left the league. And somewhere in the accounting system, there will still be one final scheduled Bobby Bonilla payment. $1,193,248.20. Then finally, the agreement will be complete. 25 annual payments, nearly $30 million in total scheduled cash. All because the original $5.9 million was not paid when the Mets released him. And that is why Bobby Bonilla Day is more than a funny sports story. It is a lesson about what happens when time enters a contract. The amount printed on a deal matters. But so does when the money is paid. The interest rate matters. The number of payments matters. The length of the agreement matters. $5.9 million can sound smaller than $30 million, but once you spread money across decades and add interest, those numbers tell very different stories. For the Mets, delaying the payment solved a problem in the present and created an obligation for the future. For Bonilla, delaying the payment meant giving up immediate access to millions of dollars in exchange for decades of guaranteed scheduled income. Same contract, opposite timelines, and that tiny 8% figure sitting inside the structure of the deal ended up being worth millions. So every July 1st, while baseball fans joke about Bobby Bonilla Day, another payment reminds everyone of a decision made more than 3 decades earlier. A player the team wanted to stop paying immediately, became the player they would keep paying for decades. And that's how one small clause can change everything. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to One Small Clause for more videos about contracts, ownership, lawsuits, and the hidden rules that shape real lives. And if you want another story right now, tap one of the videos on screen.